Where can you go when the demands of the world are greater than the sum of your patience and empathy? If you're the 60s doo-wop group, The Drifters, you head for the roof. But if you're Mr. Henry Bemis, you deposit yourself in a bank vault. Your only interest? A moment of respite, hoping that the refreshing sounds of silence pay dividends through a life well read. But for Henry Bemis, withdrawal from humanity is not all capital. Isolation grows taxing, and there are some losses that simply can't be written off. In the Twilight Zone. As I sit down to record this episode, in the back of my mind are all of the tasks and deadlines that are piled upon my insufficient brain and body. I have papers to grade, lessons to create, publications to write, things to fix around the house. And amidst all of that, I still have to find some time to be human, to appreciate my marriage, my loved ones, my students, and all of you out there who are spending some of your precious time to be with me. Stop and smell the roses, they say. But what if I don't want to smell roses? What if I just want a moment to sit with my own thoughts undisturbed? As the bard would say, to think, perchance to dream. The world today is filled with all manners of communication, all vying for our attention. And although technology has undoubtedly added more vehicles for communication, we seem to say much less, and what we do say doesn't always seem that important. More than I can remember, I find that it's important for my own health that I get at least a half an hour or so a day where I can just be with my own thoughts, to make sense of the clutter and chaos and prepare for the day ahead of me. With that in mind, let me introduce someone who is probably at least somewhat known to us all. Mr. Henry Bemis, a man who wants nothing more than some time to read. Poetry, the news, even political buttons, anything that he can get his eyes on. And although I don't recommend people locking themselves away in bank vaults, there are times when I understand the sentiment. But when a cataclysmic explosion wipes out humanity, and Bemis finally finds that moment to himself, his thoughts are drowned out by the deafening sounds of silence. At the height of his desperation, when all purpose and hope have left Bemis, a chance look upon a pile of rubble that used to be a library provides all that he needs to push onward in life. As the title of the story states, there is time enough at last. But, just like the devil, time can be captured, but not held for very long. Whereas one glance brought salvation, another brings ruin. As Bemis looks down to pick up a book, his glasses fall to the earth and join their place with the rest of the world, as little more than broken remains of a broken species. Bemis is left to wander, sightless, alone, and with exactly what he always wanted. Time. Time Enough at Last is directed by John Brom, teleplay by Rod Serling, and based on the short story of the same name by Lynn Venable. It originally aired on November 20th, 1959. As for our cast, it stars Jacqueline DeWitt as Helen Bemis, Vaughn Taylor as Mr. Carswell, and we will see Vaughn Taylor again in the fifth dimension. But our main character, Henry Bemis, is played by the great Burgess Meredith. Now, this is the first of 4 appearances by Meredith, and it's arguably the most well-known of his 4, although it's not my personal favorite. But that's a conversation for another time. Of course, Meredith had a wonderful career, playing some incredibly iconic characters, such as the Penguin in the Adam West Batman. But if you're like me, he's probably etched into your mind as the lovable Mickey from the Rocky franchise. Now, we'll leave it at that for now because we have more episodes to discuss the great Burgess Meredith. As for our episode tidbits, there's no doubt that Serling and Meredith believed in each other's work. In Martin Grams Jr.'s Unlocking the Door, he includes a wonderful little note that Serling wrote to Meredith dated September 10th, 1959. Quote, "You did a superb job for us, and from the rough cut I'd say that this is one of our most effective shows. Thanks, and bless you. Should you ever need a writer as a kind of personal sideman, may I volunteer?" Could you imagine having Rod Serling as your personal writer? That would be amazing. I could certainly use him for some of these rough openings, but you probably already knew that. In the Twilight Zone Companion, Zicree includes a comment that Serling made about working with Meredith. Quote, "It is so easy. He understands immediately. You respect him. Actually, one can say that everything moves right from the beginning without much talk. Burgess Meredith is in a class by himself." Now, I have to imagine that one of, if not the greatest, compliments you can pay an actor of any era is that they were easy to work with. The actors are there to produce a vision, and although some actors become the vision themselves with good and bad results, there's a part of me that always has a bit of a soft spot for people who dream and want to see their visions come to fruition. It sounds to me like Meredith respected the idea that a director has a vision and that it should be given a fair chance to be seen. Now, as for my initial thoughts on the episode, come on. There are certain episodes of The Twilight Zone that are almost inarguably great or at least impactful, and this is definitely one of those. Now, I have had conversations with people who hate the ending, which is fine. There's definitely a part of us that probably feels at least a little bit like Bemis may have had his issues, but he doesn't deserve that ending. But whether you like the ending or not, you have to admit, it's quite a moment to see those glasses hit the floor and shatter. Our throats just drop right into our chests. And you know what? Something else. What this episode does that is truly brilliant, and it's not, I think, done often enough, I think, in our narratives today, is it exposes an important truth about life. Life is sometimes cruel and unfair, and there's no way around it. But, having said that, I will still try to argue a little later in the show that there's definitely some room for laying blame at the feet of Henry Bemis. Oh yeah, that's right. Buckle up, friends. We're going there. Let's dive into question 1. Why do we seem so interested today in stories that involve the almost complete destruction of the species? Now, when The Walking Dead came out over a decade ago, I have to admit, I was pretty drawn into it. I didn't really make it past about 3 or 4 seasons, but I did enjoy the high-stakes storylines and the constant intensity of our intrepid characters having to fight off the undead and the still living. The people who created the show were able to tap into something that was festering within society, a deep-seated need for purposeful existence. Every decision that was made, every action that was carried out, all of it had glorious, glorious purpose. And every time the sun broke in the morning, it ushered in a new beginning, a chance to build something useful, to partake in the resurgence of the human spirit. And at night, when it was quiet, just before our eyes gave way to sleep, the moon would provide a spotlight just for us, to give us a personal stage, to give thanks for the day, and to sprinkle a bit of hope for the morrow. Okay, so that might have sounded a bit dramatic and a little romantic, but still, that's kind of what we're being sold with these apocalyptic stories, or at least many of them. Of course, there's also the death, and famine, betrayal, all of the horrors that you can believe, and even some that you probably couldn't believe if you tried. And then there's the constant dread, the fear. Let's stay there for a bit and talk about some real life fear on an extinction level. In Time Enough at Last, Bemis reads a news article in the bank vault about the H bomb, or hydrogen bomb, and its destructive force. At the time, America was in the middle of an arms race with the Soviet Union, a Cold War, and with each explosive that was added to their respective arsenals, a new level of fear was also added to their respective citizens. Although traditional war and plagues have always been around and could always cause massive destruction to the species, these new bombs brought a whole new level of concerns for the future of mankind. If the world was going to end, it suddenly seemed likely that it was going to be by our own hands. But out of fear, we often find strength, and out of ugliness, we can find some beauty. In 1954, just 5 years prior to Time Enough at Last, a man by the name of Shigeru Kayama, and please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing his name as it should be, Mr. Kayama was developing a character that would go on to become one of the most well-known figures in cinema history. Or should I say, monsters in history. The first Gojira, or Godzilla, film emerged on the big screens in 1954. And although the film differed somewhat from Kayama's initial vision, we cannot deny the lasting impact that he's had on both the giant monster genre and science fiction. I think the latter one is often overlooked or neglected. You see, Godzilla is a product of radioactive testing, a bringer of judgment upon us as a species. In later iterations, he will become a kind of protector of humanity, but that was not always the case. Godzilla serves as a reminder that there are consequences to our actions, and these consequences can be extinction-level threats. To circle back to our question, why do we yearn for these stories of destruction? I think the answer to that question is twofold. First, like Godzilla and even The Walking Dead, there's a part of us that believes we need reminders of the fragilities and blessings that come with being human, with being alive. At any moment, these can be taken away from us, and we're left in a state of clawing and scratching to keep mankind from going extinct. There are times when we can romanticize this struggle. I've heard people talk about wishing that we could experience a Walking Dead scenario, and I know I'm not alone in that. I know some of you, maybe even some of you, have thought it, once or twice. I get it, I do. But rather than look at them as if, there's something like, what's your problem? I actually spent some time thinking about, okay, so why would someone say something like that? Which brings me to my second point about why we love returning to this genre. I do believe that there's a part of us in modern society that really does yearn for a kind of destruction. Now, wait, hear me out. Destruction in the sense that it leads to a potential rebirth and resetting of society or civilization. Believe me, I don't want this. I do not believe we should want this. But the more our civilization becomes complex, the more I believe we'll want a destructive moment, something to slow down the continuing expansion of complexities that are added to our daily lives. My worry, and I really hope I'm wrong here, is that this yearning for destruction will lead us to another large-scale war. And there'll be reasons thrown around for why we need it, and many will likely seem proper in nature, and many actually will be. But just underneath it, I think there will be this disturbing call towards self-destruction. So how do we fight that? How do we avoid that? With empathy, care, steadfastness, camaraderie, and humanity. All of the things that Rod Serling himself tried to put into the Twilight Zone. Coming back to our episode, Bemis is actually a pretty interesting character. He originally wants nothing more than to be left alone. He quite literally closes the door on the bank vault in order to create his own world, a space from which no one else can enter. But one of his main problems is that he doesn't really quite realize that this space already exists internally in his mind. He seems to shut people out of his world. He treats others like they're NPCs in a video game, characters who are only there to be interacted with on his terms. And then when the bomb hits and it externalizes and makes manifest the solitude that he believed he wanted, he finally realizes that he has taken his access to humanity for granted. Something that I believe we can all do at times. But something else that's actually kind of interesting about Bemis is when you really kind of stop and break down that ending sequence where he's about to, use the pistol that he has with him because the solitude and the thought of solitude is so overwhelming. And then the level of happiness, right? The salvation of seeing those books, how, in some ways, how easily people are replaced by the books. I don't 100%, like I said, know what to do with that, because in one sense, it's very healthy for him to realize that the solitude is going to be horrible. And actually, it humanizes him in a way that I don't think he is humanized up till that point. But then just so easily why he's so happy, like, oh, I don't need people after all. I have books. That's still problematic. It's still not exactly the most healthy thing in the world. And so you could almost make the point there that he is happier. He genuinely is happier with the destruction of the species as long as he has his time for his books. And that's pretty terrible. But it also kind of leads us into our second question here. So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, question 2. Undoubtedly, Bemis is a character who has our empathy, maybe even our sympathy. But should we be laying more blame on him for his difficult life and even the final outcome of the episode? All right, I admit it. This might be an unpopular take, so I'm fully prepared to be wished into the cornfield. But when I rewatched this episode for the show, I realized a few things that I never really did before. If you're watching me right now as opposed to just listening, you'll notice that I wear glasses, like Henry Bemis. Well, there was a time not too long ago when my glasses had started to become somewhat looser. They began to slip down my nose more easily, and on a few occasions even almost fell right off my face. I finally realized that I needed to get them fixed when I was giving a lecture in class. I looked down at my notes, and they fell right down in front of everybody. Now, my glasses didn't break, but it did prompt me to finally go to the vision store where I purchased them, and I had the technician bend them back into place. Now, at the 8:53 mark in the episode, Helen, that's Henry Bemis's wife, starts to rip out the pages of his poetry book and throws them on the floor. And Bemis bends down to pick them up, and his glasses immediately fall off. It's foreshadowing the ending, of course, because he's diving for his book there and not paying attention to his glasses. So they could have just as easily broke right there in that moment as well. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this, and maybe it is a weak argument, that's fine. But had Bemis not been so much with his head in the clouds, would he have been more likely to get his glasses adjusted so that they wouldn't fall off so easily? I think you could make the argument that the answer is yes. And additionally, I love literature and poetry, enough to make it my life's work. But really, the only time that he was happy and engaged was when he was reading, like we alluded to last time. Should that have been a sign to him that he needs to open up his world a bit more, to look for ways to find happiness in other areas of existence? Now, I want to make it clear, I don't think he deserves the ending that he gets. But is there a bit more responsibility on his end than we are initially willing to give him? You know what? I kind of think so. I think there are certain aspects to his character that are more easily seen today in our world. That idea of wanting isolation, wanting to own our own narrative, to not allow others to impinge upon our existence, our lives. And I think we can become, if we're not careful, a kind of Henry Bemis, and maybe lead ourselves down a pathway of self destruction. So, where did you find your moment of awe? Something that moved you or inspired you to think beyond the surface? Again, as many of you can note if you're watching the episode, you'll see I'm a lover of books. As Mr. Carswell says in the episode, I am a reader. Yeah, that's right. I went there. These are the jokes. I love great literature and poetry. And one of the poets mentioned in the episode is the great T.S. Eliot. And he's written some of my favorite works, The Wasteland, The Four Quartets, and the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have had quite a few chances to teach the love song, and we always have a wonderful conversation in the classroom about the measure of a person's life. But there's one section of the poem that always prompts me to think, and here it is. In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. It's that last part that always gets me. Every morning I get up and I have my cup of coffee, and when it runs out, I go to the store and I buy more, and I begin the next day the same. I wonder how many spoons of coffee I've had in the past 10 years, and how many more spoons of coffee I have left. Does that sound a bit too dramatic? Well, maybe. Let me try to be a little plainer in my point. If we're not careful, we begin to believe that coffee spoons are the only legitimate way to measure our lives, tangible things that anchor us to reality. We can become so entrenched in the day-to-day that we offer ourselves no time to actually be in the present moment with others, to experience something out of the ordinary and wonderful. But if that's true, the opposite is also true as well. To bring this back to our Twilight Zone episode, Henry Bemis probably could have used a few coffee spoons in his life, things that could anchor him to reality. But I would be a hypocrite if I didn't admit that there are times when I hide, in my own version of a bank vault, with a book or something in order to avoid the world and be carried away somewhere else. To be reminded of the grandness of the human experience through great works of literature. It's important for us to find our balance, our coffee spoons, and our bank vaults. So where do I rate this episode? Well, again, come on. It's definitely an upper tier episode. It's probably a standard for upper tier episodes for many of you, and I can't really argue too much against it. However, as I alluded to, it's a favorite, but it isn't even my favorite Burgess Meredith episode. I place this one stoutly and squarely in my upper middle tier. There's absolutely no denying its brilliance and the impact, the pop culture impact even, that this episode has had. Next time, we'll be discussing Perchance to Dream. Now, I'm going to issue a potential spoiler alert here for these questions. So if you want to see the episode first, go ahead and turn off this KOI episode and go watch the Twilight Zone episode. You can then come back here and get the questions. So, spoiler alert. Here are your questions for Perchance to Dream. Question 1. Does Edward recognize Miss Thomas, the receptionist, at the beginning of the episode, or not? Question 2. Is Edward killed by his dream, or is it the heart problems that get him? And question 3. Where do you find your moments of awe? Well, that's another episode in the books, and a big one at that. So many different shows have spoofed Time Enough at Last, but I think my favorite is still the Family Guy version with the little brain cell. Oh, I love that one. Anytime it's on TV, I have to wait till the ending and get there and just watch it. Absolutely fantastic. So I do have a few key comments here that I want to acknowledge from the YouTube channel. And these comments come from the Lonely episode. Jackie K. Jono writes, I hope I got that right, quote, Jean Marsh was also a companion on Doctor Who. Thanks, Jackie. That's fantastic. I'm one of those people who kind of goes in and out of Doctor Who, and I don't recall seeing Jean Marsh. So you've given me something to do. I can go back and kind of take a look and see which Doctor Who is paired with Jean Marsh there. So thank you. Mark Flavin 1L writes, really like the lens you presented here. With the epidemic of loneliness we're seeing, it's no doubt that synthetic companions, be they AI chatbots or robots, will start to fill the gap. But what happens when we start to care for them and they can't care for us? Their models may mimic feelings, but the gap between feeling and mimicry is essentially infinite. But more scary is when they can feel, and for whatever reason, your companion doesn't like you. Can you compel feelings? Where does the line between ownership, companionship, and selfhood lay? You know, you've got a lot of really great questions there, Mark, especially about the compelling feelings thing. So let's say we can simply program these robots, i.e., compel them to feel for us. I guess my question from that would be, would we really respond well to that? Would we feel like we're being genuinely cared for? You know, as human beings, we tend to get a sense when someone is being forced to like us, let's say. And that doesn't always go over well. So I'm not 100% sure what to do with the idea of, could we reach that level where we know they're being compelled and still feel valued? Maybe that's the best way to put it. But thanks, Mark. Those are phenomenal questions. C. Siri offers a different take. Quote, we haven't failed as a society. We've simply extended life beyond what's reasonable. So a machine companion makes so much sense as a pacemaker or an artificial heart valve. You know, that's a good point, C. Siri, in the sense that if we always think of them, you know, kind of like heart valves or pacemakers, ways to extend our abilities as a species, I think that might end up being the healthiest way for us to interact with our soon-to-be robot overlords. Okay, I went a bit dark and dramatic there at the end, but still, thanks, C. Siri. That's a really good perspective. In fact, thank you to all of you who take the time to comment and keep our conversations going. These are absolutely wonderful, and I'm already starting to see a community forming, and that's exactly what I was hoping for. Now, a quick note. I'm a one-man show over here, so I'm writing, producing, and editing this, as well as maintaining the website. But my primary concern as of late is really dialing in the audio for the show to get more consistency. And that includes both the monologues that I do at the beginning with the video. You know, I've got to match all that up. I've got to do some green screen work and stuff like that. And I'm trying to get that to be more consistent also with the audio of the main episodes as well. So hopefully this will all start to really fall into place soon. Head over to thekeyofImagination.com to continue our conversation. You can rate this episode, learn more about me, watch previous episodes of KOI, and check out my Curios page where I showcase some of the Twilight Zone trinkets I've bought over the years. I encourage people to email me thoughts and comments, whether it's about a particular Twilight Zone episode, your rating for an episode, or about the Key of Imagination show. You can get those to me as a text email, an audio clip, or even a video clip of roughly no more than 5 minutes to keyofimaginationsshow@gmail.com. Keep in mind, we're trying to maintain a family-friendly atmosphere. And if you would rather I not use your comment on the show, please indicate that so I can respect your decision. If you enjoyed the show, I ask that you please take a moment and do at least one of the following to help build our community. Rate the show, review the podcast, leave comments, thumbs up, all of the usual algorithmic gymnastics that will help us get the show in front of more people and help us build our community of Twilight Zone fans. However, even if you do none of that, and you absolutely hated every minute of this, I would still like to thank you for spending some time with me. Until next time, remember, All doors are open to those who possess the key of imagination.